Thank you very much. Those are the sports headlines. The latest news here from Westminster is that Cabinet is bringing about Kemi Badenoch and Kit Malthouse, the new Education Secretary, former Mayor's Deputy Mayor of London. Good morning, Mr Malthouse. And Kemi Badenoch, who of course was a leadership challenger. She's now in international trade, which was Liz Truss's job, of course, before she became Foreign Secretary. Critics say, well, that means that one potential rival is going to be travelling around the world for quite a lot of the time. But I think it's fair to say it's a hugely important brief for the government post-Brexit. It's a new department, of course, didn't exist before Brexit, and therefore a role that Liz Truss will be particularly interested in. We've already seen leaving the Downing Street, number 10 this morning, the Armed Forces Minister James Heappey. He's one of those who's not in the cabinet but attends cabinet. It's a subtle difference. It allows the Prime Minister to kind of give favours to a few more friends and allies, even if they don't get full cabinet jobs. That's Chris Heaton-Harris, the new Northern Ireland Secretary. Himself is formerly at the Whip's office. There goes Penny Mordaunt. Good morning, Miss Mordaunt. Good morning. Robert Buckland, the Wales Secretary, former Justice Secretary, of course. He's one of those who switched his support. He was a backer of Rishi Sunak and then quite late on in the campaign came out for Liz Truss. Underlines the fact, of course, that there is no Rishi Sunak supporter in the full cabinet. The Attorney General, Micah Ellis, was a supporter. He will attend cabinet. We've got a few more. We still haven't seen the big beast of the cabinet. Perhaps she's keeping a small number inside for a closer chat. There's always that issue about how effective a cabinet of 24 people can be, and whether or not you need allies, closer circle of the big beasts, you might call them, the Foreign Secretary, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and of course her great friend, the Deputy Prime Minister and Health Secretary, Therese Coffey. While we wait and keep our eye on the door, let me talk now to Rosa Prince. Rosa is editor of The House magazine. You were, of course, a former lobby correspondent for a long time as well, Rosa. It's a strange thing, this period of the transition, isn't it? Particularly when it happens within a government. After all, some of these people were ministers before. Many of the people who have been deposed will be friends and allies.
That's right, and I think what characterises this cabinet is not just that they're relatively young and inexperienced, but also how many...
Here comes James Cleverly, the new Foreign Secretary. Good morning, James. And so there we go, another run of ministers coming out. There'll be plenty more to come. Of course, he has a very short walk, doesn't he, Rosa? Because the Foreign Office is just through that archway there.
Yeah, lovely new office just there, yes.
One of the best offices in the business. A few of the officials coming out as well. We were talking there, carry on, about this new cabinet.
This cabinet is characterised not just by who's there, but by who's not there. You've talked already about how Rishi Sunak didn't get a job, and neither did many of his supporters, just one there attending cabinet. We may see some more coming up as the junior ranks are filled. But there are so many big beasts now on those backbenches. I mean, think of Michael Gove, think of Sajid Javid. I think she's going to have her work set out, really, to make sure her relations with the parliamentary party are smooth.
And still prowling around Boris Johnson, who doesn't show any signs of wanting to leave the Commons. I mean, it's worth reminding people, isn't it? The exception of Theresa May, David Cameron and Tony Blair left the Commons almost on the same day they stopped being Prime Minister. Gordon Brown didn't hang around very long either.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, as you say, I was a lobby correspondent, and I remember when Boris Johnson was the mayor, and he used that exact phrase, if I am called, like Cincinnatus, to return to the plough, and by that he meant, well, I might go back to the Commons, but if the people want me. Does that mean he fancies coming back?
Yeah.
There's plenty of speculation around that he thinks he could return, that if it all goes horribly wrong for Liz Truss, that he could be there and be elected again, and it be another extraordinary chapter in this the story of the Boris Johnson life story.
And there's an intriguing historical precedent for that, isn't there? Because Ted Heath apparently only finally gave up his ambition of returning to the leadership of the Tory party when Margaret Thatcher won in '79, was convinced the party would realise the terrible mistake it had made. So, I mean, some people would say delusion in politics is not uncommon among those who've been leader.
Yeah, and then he went in for the long sulk. Do you remember that? He sat on the backbenches and he really cribbed and complained about whatever Thatcher was doing for the next 10 years or so. Boris Johnson may well...
There goes, good morning, Secretary of State. Congratulations to you both. There goes Jacob Rees-Mogg, and also interesting man at his side there, Graham Stewart, because a lot of people have been a bit worried about Jacob Rees-Mogg as Energy Secretary as well as Business Secretary, because he's a bit of a sceptic on climate, who was certainly given that impression. Graham Stewart, the new Minister for Climate, will be working in his department. is somebody who's been supporting efforts to curb climate change for quite a long time.
That's right, and she also actually appointed Alok Sharma back to the role of COP president. If you remember, in November we hosted the COP summit, and we maintained that presidency for the next year. So she's kind of having it both ways. Jacob Rees-Mogg, very sceptical about climate change, very sceptical about those targets for switching to renewables. But at the same time, she does have people in the cabinet and around the cabinet who can kind of nudge her back on track.
We talk about the new cabinet. The other question, of course, is how she manages her relationship with Parliament, the House of Commons and the House of Lords. How important is that going to be, and how big a challenge do you think it is for her personally, given that she's not somebody who perhaps has been held in the highest regard among her parliamentary colleagues in the past?
Well, that's right. I mean, she wasn't even the second most popular candidate when we got to the first round of voting. She only snuck through right at the end, if you remember. It was Penny Mordaunt all the way who we thought would get through to the final ballot, which is of the membership. She didn't do that well, actually, with the grassroots, considering how we thought it would be a walkover.
Not as well as, say, Ian Duncan Smith, whose leadership didn't end well.
Absolutely. I think it's the lowest ratio. So she's here knowing that she does not have the full-thrusted support of all her MPs. So there's that problem. Then you've got the issue of legislation. All of the other MPs who were elected under Boris Johnson, they had a personal mandate. They were tied to him. They were tied to his manifesto. They don't have that same attachment to Liz Truss. They may feel a bit more emboldened to rebel on legislation. And then you've got the whole other issue of the House of Lords. Now we have a new leader of the Lords in Lord Truss, who is a bit of a hardliner, a bit of a right-winger. And I think the thinking there is that the Lords are going to need some management. There are any number of bills where they might rebel on. And again, they won't feel as tied to the manifesto, given that Liz Truss was not elected on that manifesto.
The Lords is a strange place, isn't it, for governments, in the sense that they don't have a majority up there. They have no power over the individuals, because once you're there for life, so you can't get rid of somebody. And they do what the House of Commons doesn't do, where they look at every single clause of every piece of legislation.
That's right, and I've heard many complaints. The magazine I edit is very attached to the House of Lords, and we have a lot of interaction with them. And they have been complaining that in the last few years under Boris Johnson, legislation was rushed and it was up to them to sort things out. So I don't think they feel in a particularly good mood about the government, and Lord Truss, I think, actually has one of the most difficult tasks in government now.
Now, one of the things I was most struck by listening to the long interview that Liz Truss gave to my colleague Laura Kuenssberg on Sunday morning in Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg was this quote when she talked about the way government has been conducted in the last few years. She says, to look at everything through the lens of redistribution, I believe, is wrong. The economic debate for the last 20 years has been dominated by discussions about distribution, and what's happened is that we have had relatively low growth. It's going to be difficult to square that, isn't it, with things like the levelling up agenda?
Yeah, with a levelling up. It was notable she didn't mention levelling up in her speech. That, of course, was the big hallmark of, or we were meant to believe, of Boris Johnson's administration. It got blown a bit off course by COVID, and then the idea was that he was going to swing back and really take a focus on that. It doesn't seem like she has the same priorities. It was a similar, actually, plan that Theresa May came to office with, saying she wanted to help the parts of the country that hadn't been reached by the Conservatives. Even David Cameron and George Osborne had that northern powerhouse. You don't sense that same imperative from Liz Truss. It doesn't seem to be on her list of priorities.
Now, she has appointed Simon Clarke as there's Brendan Lewis and also Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, is continuing in his job. Would have been hard to see him being moved. Really,
the only one, I think, who stayed in the place that they were in.
Now, that is intriguing, isn't it? Because how long sometimes Cabinet... I mean, to be fair to Boris Johnson, one of the things he didn't do was keep moving people around. I mean, one of the big criticisms of Tony Blair, he moved people every 5 minutes, and then came to realise in his second term that actually needs people who will stay and follow through. Boris Johnson didn't move very many people. A lot of these people will be trying to get to grips with the department kind of in the middle of a government.
Yeah, I mean, some of the people she's appointed were more junior ministers in those departments.
Yes.
For example, James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, had been a minister. So that's one way she's tried to get around that. But I think you're right. There are an awful lot of people in there who haven't had much experience of government, let alone cabinet. Chloe Smith, for example, has been really catapulted up the ranks. So, yeah, it's going to take people a little while to bed in, I think. And I was taken by, usually when there's a cabinet reshuffle, you keep a few people there for some consistency. And she really hasn't done that, apart from Ben Wallace, as you said.
Now, Liz, talk a little bit about Liz Wallace herself, because she's been people sometimes forget she's the longest serving cabinet minister now. She's been in there since the David Cameron days. She's held until the Foreign Office relatively junior jobs in government, but she's a survivor.
Yeah, and she's also someone who just seems to have so much self-belief and confidence.
Skin like a rhinoceros, one of her constituents.
Absolutely. I don't think she's got any self-doubt going in there. You can imagine some prime ministers walking in that door for the first time and thinking, oh, what have I done? Apparently, I heard an anecdote yesterday that when David Cameron came in, the first thing he did from Gus O'Donnell, who was his cabinet secretary, was put his head in his hands. And I think the enormity of it all hit him in that moment. I don't think Liz Truss will have had that. I don't think her head will have been in her hands. I think she really enjoyed becoming Prime Minister and will enjoy it. I mean, most of us would think, given all the crises that are facing her, we wouldn't fancy it, but I think she really does.
Thick skin may not be a bad thing to have right now.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. You know, like Margaret Thatcher, she's a lady who's not for turning, so I think she's very much going to plough her own furrow. That's all very well if you come to the right decisions. If it's the wrong decision, then it may prove, you know, quite intractable. She doesn't like, during the whole of the campaign, people kept telling her, you can't talk about cutting taxes, you have to come up with a plan to deal with the cost of living crisis, and she just wasn't going to do it. It actually didn't damage her with the membership, but I wonder if that'll play as well with the wider country.
Rosa Prince, who is editor of The House, the parliamentary magazine, thank you very much. I know we'll be talking again over the coming weeks and months of the new Liz Truss administration. Now, an emergency session of the UN Security Council has been held in New York to discuss the state of the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. They had calls for the immediate creation of a security zone to shield the facility from fighting. Russia is being urged to allow that to go on. With more on that from Kyiv, our security correspondent Hugo Bachega.
This morning, we heard from Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, saying that he requested clarification from the International Atomic Energy Agency after that report was published yesterday. He said there is a need for additional explanation because there are a number of issues in the report. Now, the IAEA issued this report after inspectors visited the Zaporizhzhia complex yesterday. The report said the monitors observed damage at different locations at the Russian-occupied facility. Russian military vehicles and personnel are positioned across the complex. And the report also raised concern about the situation involving the Ukrainian staff operating the station. The monitor said the situation is unacceptable because these workers are having to endure high stress and also a lot of pressure. And the report called for the creation of a safety zone around this facility. Now, yesterday at that emergency meeting, Antonio Guterres called for the creation of a demilitarized zone. He's been calling for this zone for quite some time now. He said that Russian military personnel should leave the area of the station and Ukraine should promise that it would not move its troops in. But it's hard to see it happening because so far the Russians have rejected any proposal that it would include Russian troops being removed from this area. And Russia has been saying that Russian troops are there protecting this plant.
Hugo Bachega there in Kyiv, where, Gita, we are told that President Zelensky has already invited Liz Truss, so maybe that will be her first foreign visit. Back to you.
Sean, thanks very much for now. Let's move on to something away from politics, you might think. Researchers have followed and studied chimpanzees in the Ugandan rainforest, and they've found that they drum out messages on tree roots to communicate. The signature rhythms allow them to send information over long distances, revealing who's there and what they're doing. Take a listen to this, and a warning, it is quite loud. Well, let's try to decipher what that means with Dr. Catherine Hobiter. She's a primatologist from the University of St Andrews. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
What does the research show about how chimps communicate?
Well, we've known for some time that chimps drum. And there's these beautiful big buttress roots in the forest, and they found a fantastic big wide drumming surface to give these booming noises. And it'll carry more than 1 kilometer through the forest, which, you know, if you're a chimpanzee in a large community in a rainforest and you need to find each other and keep in touch, is a great way to do so. but we weren't sure what was encoded in those drumming messages. And what we've been able to show is that the chimps have their own signature rhythm, so actually their identity. So when I hear a drum, I know, oh, that's Alf, that's Ben, that's Frank. So we know who they are, what they're doing, and where they are. And that allows them to sort of check in with each other through the day.
And what is the difference in their drumming patterns?
You can tell. I mean, it's very much like the kind of way in which we describe musical rhythm. So you've got some drummers who are like Ben, he's our alpha male in Waibira. He's a very regular sort of 4/4 beat rock drummer, kind of straight down the line kind of guy. And then you've got the chimps like Tristan or like Zalu, who are much more freeform, lots of beats, little extra flourishes in there. And so, yeah, you can tell each one has their own signature way of putting the rhythm and the timing together.
And when they are drumming, are they just literally saying, I am here, or could there be more encoded within those patterns?
We do know that we can also tell where they are and what they're doing. So we know whether or not they're traveling, which when they have these signatures, one of the things that was the most interesting finding for us is that sometimes when they drum, they don't put their individual signatures in there. So for example, when they're displaying, and there might be sometimes when you're a male chimpanzee, you want to show off how strong you are, but you don't necessarily want all of the other male chimps who might be eavesdropping to know who it is who's sort of displaying to the ladies at that point. So the chimps seem to be able to encode not just who's there, but also what they're doing at the same time.
So it is a really sophisticated form of communication. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great. It's really flexible, and flexibility is something that always gets us excited because that's one of the absolutely key characteristics of human language.
So you could recognise specifically who was making which sounds where. Is it possible that, you know, even more subtle messages are within these drumming patterns that we could yet find out?
Definitely. So we're just at the surface of this. And one of the next steps for us, for example, is to look at different groups of chimpanzees and see whether or not there might be something like a local drumming style or culture that tells you not just who's drumming, but also their group identity. So, oh, that's Frank, but Frank's a Sonso chimp. And being able to distinguish different groups in the forest might also be really useful for these chimpanzees. They're quite territorial. So you don't want to make the mistake of going towards individuals if they're from the wrong community.
Just funny, I mean, it is extraordinary to read this. Are we kind of massively underestimating the complexity of the animal kingdom overall, wider than chimpanzees?
I mean, I think so. And I think every time that we draw a line in the sand and we say humans are special, we're different from other species because we do this, the minute that line's in the sand, very quickly, if we really start to look at it, we can find other species that have similar capacities. And humans are very different in the way that we communicate, but we're not more complex, we're not more special, we're just, each species has its own way of doing things. And I think often it's been our ability to recognize that that's really having to do the catch-up job.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Dr. Catherine Hoberter. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, millions of people in England and Scotland have been invited to book their autumn COVID booster jabs, with shots being offered to those at the highest risk first. Care home residents in Devon were some of the first to receive it. The Scott Bingham reports.
A weekly session to raise the spirits, and some residents were up and dancing, whilst others rolled up their sleeves to get their latest booster jab.
You've just had your jab.
Yes.
How was it?
Painless. Yeah, no trouble at all. Didn't feel a thing.
It's a matter of, could be a case of life or death, couldn't it? That's not summing it up too harshly, but it is, isn't it? It can be.
I think it is important that we carry on having any immunisations that are recommended and any of the boosters for residents and for staff, because it's still out there and we've still got to protect them. They are very vulnerable.
This is one of 700 care homes across England in the first wave of the NHS's autumn COVID vaccine booster programme.
We have contacted the care homes that we're going to come out to visit, and they're all booked in over the next week or two, and we're just working our way round them with the teams going out and about, doing as many as we can, as quickly as we can. Our emphasis being to protect the most vulnerable as soon as possible, care homes and housebound patients being in that category.
The residents and staff here at Honiton Manor are among the first 1.6 million people to be eligible this week for the autumn booster. They'll also be some of the first to receive the bivalent vaccine.
The UK is the first country to approve Moderna's bivalent, which targets both the Omicron and original COVID variants. It's one of 4 vaccines approved for the autumn booster. And a further 4 million people will be able to book their jabs from next week. They include the over 75s and those with weakened immune systems, as well as health and social care staff who don't work in care homes. But people are being urged to wait for their invitation before booking an appointment. Scott Bingham, BBC News.
Back to Westminster very soon. First, let's catch up with the weather. Here's Matt.
Hello, once again, a few of you will stay dry through today, but once again, we've got some big billowing clouds that have started to build up, and it's going to be another day of sunshine and thundery showers with those ever-changing skies. The more persistent rain we've seen in northern parts of Scotland, well, that will continue to fade away into the afternoon, so brightening up to the northeast certainly. And with winds lighter across southern Scotland into northern England, the showers here are fairly slow moving, and that does mean there'll be areas where avoid the showers altogether. But Northern Ireland, down across Wales, Midlands, parts of southern England, the showers will come and go through the day, pushed along by a strong breeze, especially to the southwest. Although I reckon down these southern coastal counties, even though it'll be blustery, there'll be fewer showers during the afternoon. Temperatures this afternoon a little bit down on yesterday, but still warm enough in those sunnier moments. And it'd be a warm enough night again tonight, with the wind still coming in from a generally southeasterly direction. Frequent showers, though, across the southern half of England and Wales. Some rumbles of thunder. More persistent rain potentially for East Anglia and Lincolnshire later. Northern half of the UK, fewer showers, but greater chance of some mist and fog patches to take us into Thursday. Now, the big chart for Thursday still shows the very same area of low pressure has been with us all week, but now it's starting to move eastwards. And in doing so, the centre of the low pressure, where the winds are lightest, will pass across Wales through the day. So here, showers which will move through the skies quite quickly in the morning will become slow moving. Could drop quite a bit of rainfall for 1 or 2. Frequent, fast moving showers across the south, developing more widely as we go through the day, but more persistent rain starting in Yorkshire, pushing into northeast of England, southeast Scotland later. The north and west of Scotland, Northern Ireland, actually not a bad day. Fewer showers. Many places will be dry, cooler though than today, and cooler still across parts of Scotland as we go into Friday. Strong easterly winds, persistent rain through central southern areas, extending also into Northern Ireland. England and Wales, it's still that story of sunshine and for some fairly slow moving heavy and thundery showers. A bit of warmth in the sunshine between the showers, but overall starting to turn cooler to see the week out. And as we go into the weekend, as that area of low pressure finally departs our shores, we're almost in between weather systems. The winds fall light ahead of rain late on Sunday, and that does mean through Saturday and Sunday be a bit cooler by night. There'll be some fairly dense patches of fog and mist around first thing in the morning, but actually fewer showers by day and a little bit of sunshine through the afternoon. See you later.
Morning. Come and have a seat. Now, of course, I'm not going to go easy on you. There are some really big questions we've got to try and get answers to this morning. But I'll be fair, and we just want to hear what you've got to say. So, shall we get on with it?
We're rolling.
Here we go. Join me to hear from the biggest names inside and outside politics.
Sunday with Laura Koonsberg. Sundays at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
You experienced racism. Why didn't you walk away?
That's a really good question.
You're a politician. You read the polls.
I'm not a politician. I don't read the polls.
Yeah,
I
you are
sit
a
in Judiciary
politician.
Committee. No,
you are
I
very definitely a politician.
No.
The very fact that there were not people who looked like you.
Hold on. I'm only halfway through my answer.
Is secret schooling happening across Afghanistan for girls?
It does.
You simply can't assume that.
Actually, yes, you can.
Hard Talk. Watch on BBC iPlayer.